1.0 Philosophy as providing the justification for the empirically unjustifiable assumptions on which empirical science depends. An empirical discipline is one whose findings, when justified, are justified by their consistency with sensory observation. Biology is an empirical discipline. So is physics. Any given empirical discipline makes assumptions that cannot be justified by that discipline, or indeed by any empirical discipline. For example, when investigating the external world, and thus when doing physics or biology, one must assume that one's senses give one accurate information about it. For if our sensory experiences turned out to be hallucinations, then any hypotheses based thereupon would be spurious. But this assumption cannot itself be given an empirical justification. More plainly, observation cannot tell you that it itself is a source of accurate information. Witnesses cannot self-corroborate. Thus, a physicist could not coherently attempt to provide experimental support for his belief that his senses are accurate, for it is only through his senses that he can know whether those experiments were even conducted as opposed to merely dreamt, or what their outcomes were, supposing that they were in fact conducted. Of course, to the extent that we are able to determine to what degree, if any, this or that particular sensory experience is veridical, we do so on the basis of other sensory experiences. But when judging that last night at 4 a.m., sleep time, I wasn't really in the presence of a talking cow, I am assuming the veridicality of the experiences with which my cow experiences fail to cohere. In general, our sensory experiences can provide only a relative justification for the judgments we make about this or that specific perception, relative to the assumption that those experiences are typically accurate. Inferences can be made as to the degree of accuracy of this or that particular perception. But we cannot legitimately assume that our sense perceptions are accurate when trying to show that sense perception is a legitimate source of information about the external world. So, since the hypotheses generated by physics are based on sensory experiences and therefore presuppose that such experiences are typically accurate, physics cannot possibly justify that presupposition. And neither, for the very same reason, can any other empirical discipline. Therefore, unless that presupposition can be justified, we know nothing about the external world, and, as a result, all of the empirical sciences crumble. It is the task not of the scientist, but of the meta-scientist, of the philosopher, in other words, to provide that justification.